The Pearl of the Caribbean, Cuba's Golden Age. Cuba in the 1950s was a nation brimming with life, a place where the past and future seemed to dance together in perfect harmony. Its vibrant culture pulsed with the rhythm of salsa, its streets echoing with the soulful melodies of son cubano, creating an atmosphere that was both electric and deeply rooted in tradition. Havana, the crown jewel, was a dazzling spectacle of Art Deco architecture, pulsating nightlife, and a flourishing tourism industry that attracted visitors from around the globe. Americans, escaping the constraints of prohibition, flocked to the island, drawn by its casinos, cabarets, and the promise of sun-drenched beaches where they could indulge in pleasures forbidden back home. The economy, fueled by sugar exports and American investment, hummed with activity, painting a picture of prosperity and progress that seemed unshakable. The Cuban people, known for their warmth, resilience, and zest for life, exuded a contagious energy that was felt by everyone who visited. From the bustling streets of Havana to the tranquil countryside, a sense of optimism pervaded the air, promising a bright future for all. The island's cultural scene flourished, producing literary giants like Alejo Carpentier and musical icons like Celia Cruz, whose voices resonated far beyond Cuba's shores, leaving an indelible mark on the world. This era, often romanticized as Cuba's golden age, stood in stark contrast to the tumultuous decades that lay ahead, a time of both glory and underlying tension. However, beneath the veneer of prosperity, simmered a potent cocktail of social inequality and political repression, threatening to disrupt the idyllic facade. Fulgencio Batista's authoritarian regime, propped up by the American government, ruled with an iron fist, silencing dissent and exacerbating the chasm between the rich and the poor, creating a society on the brink of upheaval. While the elite reveled in luxury, the majority of Cubans grappled with poverty, limited access to education, and a lack of political representation, feeling increasingly marginalized. This simmering discontent, fueled by economic disparity and political oppression, provided fertile ground for revolution as the people's cries for justice grew louder. The seeds of discontent, sown in the fertile ground of inequality, were soon to sprout into a full-blown revolution, forever altering the course of Cuba's history and reshaping its future. The glamorous facade of 1950s Cuba, while enchanting, masked the deep-seated resentment and yearning for change that would soon erupt, ushering in a new and uncertain era, one that would redefine the island nation forever. The revolution's dawn, hope, and upheaval. The year 1959 marked a turning point in Cuban history.
Fidel Castro, a charismatic young lawyer leading a band of revolutionaries, toppled the Batista regime, promising a future free from corruption and inequality.
The revolution, ignited in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, swept across the island, capturing the imagination and support of the Cuban people, weary of oppression and yearning for change.
Images of bearded guerrillas triumphant atop tanks became symbols of hope and liberation. The initial years following the revolution were marked by a palpable sense of optimism and euphoria.
The revolutionary government, led by Castro and his charismatic comrade, Ernesto Che Guevara, implemented sweeping social reforms, aiming to create a more just and equitable society. Literacy campaigns were launched, healthcare was nationalized,
and land was redistributed to the peasants.
The revolution's promise of social justice resonated deeply with the masses, who saw in Castro a champion of the downtrodden. However, this initial period of hope and unity was short-lived.
The Cuban government's decision to align itself with the Soviet Union, a move driven by geopolitical realities and ideological kinship, would have profound and lasting consequences.
This alliance, while providing economic and military support, also brought with it the rigidities of Soviet-style communism, gradually transforming Cuba's political and economic landscape.
The shift towards a socialist model, while driven by noble intentions of social justice, would ultimately lead to state control over key sectors of the economy, curtailing individual freedoms and setting the stage for decades of isolation. The revolution's promise of a brighter future, while initially bright, would soon be tested by the harsh realities of the Cold War and the complexities of building a socialist state in an increasingly interconnected world. Embracing socialism, a pact with the Soviet bear. The year 1961 witnessed a seismic shift in Cuba's destiny, marking a pivotal moment in the island's history.
Fidel Castro, solidifying his grip on power, declared Cuba a socialist state, aligning the island nation firmly within the Soviet sphere of influence, a move that would redefine its future.
This momentous decision, driven by a complex interplay of ideological conviction and geopolitical pragmatism, would have far-reaching consequences, shaping Cuba's trajectory for decades to come, altering its social, economic, and political landscape.
The embrace of socialism, while initially welcomed by many Cubans yearning for social justice, would soon usher in an era of state control, economic transformation, and international isolation, changing the very fabric of Cuban society.
The Soviet Union, eager to establish a foothold in the Western Hemisphere, embraced Cuba as a strategic ally, seeing an opportunity to extend its influence.
Soviet aid, in the form of financial subsidies, oil shipments, and military hardware, flowed into the island, providing a lifeline to the nascent socialist state, ensuring its survival in a hostile environment.
This alliance, while offering a degree of economic security, also brought with it the rigidities of Soviet-style central planning, which would come to dominate Cuban economic policy.
The Cuban government, inspired by the Soviet model, nationalized industries, collectivized agriculture, and implemented a system of centralized economic control, fundamentally transforming the nation's economy.
While these measures aimed to eradicate inequality and distribute wealth more equitably, they also stifled private initiative, hampered economic efficiency, and created a climate of dependence on the Soviet Union, limiting Cuba's economic autonomy.
The Cuban economy, once characterized by a mix of private enterprise and state intervention, was now firmly under state control, with the government directing all major economic activities.
This shift, while driven by the ideals of social justice, would eventually lead to stagnation and shortages, as the inefficiencies of a centrally planned economy became increasingly apparent, affecting the daily lives of ordinary Cubans.
The Cuban people, accustomed to the vibrancy and entrepreneurial spirit that had characterized their nation, now found themselves navigating a new reality, one marked by restrictions and state control.
The embrace of socialism, while promising equality and opportunity, also brought with it limitations on individual freedoms and economic opportunities, setting the stage for a complex and often contradictory societal experiment, the effects of which are still felt today.
Isolation's grip, Cuba's lost decades. The 1960s and 1970s witnessed Cuba's increasing isolation on the world stage, a period marked by significant geopolitical shifts and internal transformations. The United States, alarmed by the presence of a communist state in its backyard, imposed a strict trade embargo on the island, severing economic and diplomatic ties. This embargo was intended to pressure the Cuban government, but had far-reaching consequences. This isolation, exacerbated by Cuba's alignment with the Soviet bloc, had profound consequences for the island's development, particularly in the realms of technology and culture. The Soviet Union became Cuba's primary ally and economic partner, influencing many aspects of Cuban life. While the rest of the world experienced a period of rapid technological advancement and cultural ferment, Cuba found itself increasingly cut off, frozen in a time warp. The technological gap between Cuba and other nations widened significantly during these decades. The US embargo, while intended to weaken the Castro regime, primarily harmed ordinary Cubans, limiting access to essential goods, medicines, and technological innovations. Everyday life became a struggle for many, as shortages became a common occurrence. The Cuban government, facing economic hardship and determined to maintain its socialist ideals, doubled down on its centralized planning model, prioritizing social programs and basic necessities over consumer goods and technological advancements. This approach aimed to ensure that basic needs were met, even if it meant sacrificing other aspects of development. While literacy rates soared and healthcare remained universal and free, Cubans faced chronic shortages of consumer goods, from basic foodstuffs to automobiles and electronics. The contrast between social achievements and material scarcity was stark. Culturally, Cuba's isolation manifested in a curious blend of preservation and stagnation. Traditional art forms were preserved, but innovation was stifled. Traditional forms of music and dance, like salsa and son, continued to thrive, nurtured by state support and a deep-rooted sense of cultural pride. These cultural expressions became symbols of national identity and resilience. However, access to foreign music, film, and literature was strictly controlled, limiting exposure to global cultural trends. This control was part of the government's effort to maintain ideological purity and prevent foreign influence. While the rest of the world embraced rock and roll, disco, and the rise of Hollywood blockbusters, Cuba remained largely insulated, its cultural landscape shaped by a blend of revolutionary fervor, traditional art forms, and limited exposure to outside influences. This insulation created a unique cultural environment, distinct from global trends. This period of isolation, while presenting significant challenges, also fostered a strong sense of national identity and resilience among the Cuban people. The shared experience of hardship and resistance to external pressure became central to the Cuban identity. The shared experience of hardship and the government's emphasis on social solidarity created a unique social fabric, characterized by a strong sense of community and a deep pride in Cuba's defiance of US pressure. This solidarity was a source of strength and unity. However, the price of this isolation was high, as Cuba fell increasingly behind the rest of the world in terms of technological progress and economic development. The long-term effects of this period are still felt today, as Cuba continues to navigate its path in a rapidly changing world.